Right, hey everyone, I'm Clue. New scheduled, banned, and restricted announcement. Yeah, so no longer do we have suspensions, we have restrictions, right? So that's going to be interesting. So first off, class constructed, no changes. So after the aftermath of Icelander and Lexi ascending to Living Legend, the class constructed metagame has looked novel, balanced, and above all, it has provided players with the opportunity to explore a wide range of heroes with credible potential to make top 8 and win tournaments. With the release of heavy hitters just around the corners, we see no need to interject at this moment. Right, no changes to class constructed. Blitz, Aether Wildfire, back to legal. Stir the Aether Winds, back to legal. Centauri Saber will become the signature weapon for Kasai and will be legal from the release of heavy hitters. Now, this is interesting, and again, a new notion just to wrap your head around, right? So at any point, a hero or a weapon that's gone, right, can be completely just reused for the new iteration of such hero. How do I feel about this? I don't know, right? From a design aspect, it's easy to just look at it straight away and say, well, that's kind of lazy, right? Why not come up with something new for the new version of Kasai? You did it for Prism, right? So why not just do it for Kasai as well? And then on the other side, it's like, well, Centauri Sabers is probably a very well-rounded card, right? From a design aspect, how could you improve upon it without power creeping, or at the same time not just go in a completely different direction? And yeah, it's a tough little nugget to swallow, because again, it's more with this concept that, well, we made weapons part of the Living Legend system through the signature, system, and now we're just going to revoke that whenever we feel like it. Again, it's these inconsistencies of the Living Legend system that I really am starting to dislike. So Blitz has recently undergone the latest shakeup in the format's history, and some of the clearest power outliners have ascended to Living Legend. Right now, the metagame feels like a blank slate, and we're excited to see how players will write the next chapter. Yeah, so this is also a very weird statement to me, right? Because right after that, they say, in the absence of Kano, Aether Wildfire and Stir the Aether Winds have both clear to return to the format. However, we are choosing to be a bit more careful with Snapback. Emperor Jakai of Asia already feels poised to ascend to high tier status. So it's a blank state where players are free to write the next chapter, but we're pretty sure the Emperor is going to be top of that, right? So let's just speed that along rather than see how it plays out and then take these cards off. Because again, going off of the score totals, right? Kano left and Emperor just slotted right in, nice and simple, right? With the amount of points he earned from this season. So it's very clear that even without those cards, Emperor was already performing quite well, right? Now we do have a great deal of spread, which is good to see, but I do think it will level out and we will see, again, these top decks, right? Again, just dominate as, more fame and more popularity, right? Shifts towards them. As more people see the top end of players play these specific decks, then they're going to shift away from experimenting on themselves, right? Once whoever figures out what the next top deck is, then that's that, right? It was just because we had this shift in the middle of a season, right? Because of their new point changes, that opened it up to be a blank state, right? Until we get that clear determination of what heroes are going to rocket back to the top. And my money's on Emperor, right? Especially with these cards back in play. Snapback makes sense, right? Because Emperor is a tier slower, to put it in easier terms, right? Because you don't have your hero ability to create that instant speed. So yeah, it will be interesting. I just find it weird that they're calling it blank state and then they know, right, that Emperor is poised to be top of that blank state. So let's give him more cards, right, that we know are powerful. Anyway, finally, we turn to the question of Centauri Saber Blitz. When Kasai, the younger version of Kasai with Golden Sands, becomes a legal hero in Blitz upon the release of heavy hitters, her signature weapon will be the Centauri Sabers. As such, Centauri Sabers will once again be legal for official tournament play in Blitz. So it'll be gone for, this few months, 2 months, right, and then come back. I don't think it slots into any other hero that well, right? Because Dorinthia wants to play Dawnblade, Emperor wants to play with Starves, and, well, Bolton wants to play with Beaming Blade. Because again, it's that idea where, aside from Emperor and Kasai, right, Warrior, their weapons seemed very distinctive, very impactful. Centauri Saber was just the best fit for the playstyle. It wasn't that it was, critical to the design. So again, I'm just, I guess I'm a little saddened that we're not going to see it taken in a different direction and have that just exploring of new mechanics, rather they've just stuck it with Centauri Saber because of how well-rounded that card design is and the fact that it is flexible enough to just fit into new Kasai. We expect both similar and divergent outcomes in the future, with a new version of previously Living Legend Ascended heroes return to the fold. In other instances, we may choose to provide a new signature weapon to align with that hero, or, in this case, Kasai is free to bring her trademark swords back into the arena once more, right? So again, it's now that open-ended, anytime we choose, right? The signature weapon you thought was gone, well, if we feel it's the best fit for the new iteration of the hero, it's coming back, right? If we feel like designing something new to complement their design, we'll do that. Otherwise, we could just, bring back something that could plague the entirety of the game like it once did. So it's an interesting concept to revolve your hand around, right? We'll talk about that a little bit more. Okay, so Living Legend and restrictions. So this is all to tackle Stravo, Awakening, restricted. Channel Link, Frigid, restricted. Crippling Crush, Hypothermia, Oakenhold, Starstruck, and Warmonger's Diplomacy, all restricted to one copy. So instead of suspensions, right, we now have restrictions, where I'm curious, right, I assume it'll be 1 and 1 in any format. So obviously while I feel like suspensions would still probably be valid in Blitz because of how quick the format is, right? Now, the biggest argument for this that I've seen, and I agree with, is all this does is prolong it, right? It reduces the speed of the deck, but it doesn't reduce the power of the deck. Because all it is now is, rather than having a 3 in 40 chance to get these cards, if you're running max copies, right, you now have a 1 in 40, right? And there's easier ways around that, and they can all still have the huge impact they once did, right? Because, that's just the way the game works in Flesh and Blood, right? The cards are so tuned to one another that it's just a matter of timing more so than ability. If you have access to these cards, having 1 or 3 isn't that big of a deal. All you're doing is increasing the likelihood of your ability to play one of those cards. Even getting 1 off is still super impactful. At the Battle Hardened in Barcelona, the community made their stance abundantly clear. The Living Legend format has a vital role in the pantheon of ways to play Flesh and Blood. And also made clear was the fact that Bravo remains every bit the power outliner he was in his time in Classic Constructed. However, despite the most dominant tournament performance we've seen from a single hero, players still seem to come away from the event with a smile on their face and a desire to play more games of Living Legend format. Oh, I don't know. Obviously, the people who played the event, yeah, but there has been a decent, outcry that, well, I don't want to touch Living Legend. I don't want to, play Stravo, and I don't want to play against Stravo. People enjoy doing powerful things during their games of Flesh and Blood, and the Living Legend is meant to be a format where those power fantasies can be showcased. In the case of Stravo, we just need to play out less frequently. And in the case of, well, every other hero, we need those fantasies to play out more frequently. Yeah. So this does slow down the deck. I don't think it's enough, right? I don't think it's enough. With a goal in mind, we begin our management of the Living Legend format with the liberal use of a restricted list. Rather than the typical bans we see in Flesh and Blood, a restricted deck can contain up to 1 copy of any particular restricted card. We'd like Living Legend format to be a place where you can continue to play all of your cards in a balanced metagame as the circumstances of the format allow us to create, right? However, we recognize that some power outliners may ultimately make that impossible. If that is true, you can rest easy knowing that we will use bans where necessary. So obviously restricted are their way to keep in line with their whole philosophy. Again, Living Legend is meant to serve as the main utility maintainer for cards, right? So although cards no longer legal in Classic Constructed or Blitz, they're still always going to be available in Living Legend, therefore they should retain some of their value, and that whole towards trying to maintain the state of every single card they design and print. Okay, we're not going to read about Stravo, right? We all know why he's broken and why these cards were used. If you don't, go look up any games, right? I'm sure there's lots of people who've done deck tech on Bravo. We are 100% committed to the Living Legend format and see it as an important, albeit more occasional part of the competitive ecosystem going forward. That is wrong. I don't think it should be occasional, right? Again, for it to have the impact and the effect that they want it to have towards cards, towards the game. It needs to be, at least on par with Blitz. You can still have Classic Constructed as the forefront event of Flesh and Blood, but it needs a lot more incentive pumped into it for people to play it, right? And to then maintain the value of those cards, and needs a lot more management, right? This is a great start, but I think a lot of us already agree that this is not enough. It is critical. We all have a place to revisit the heroes we've loved in the past. Whilst it is unlikely that we can ever reach a state where every living legend ascended hero is a substantial part of the metagame, we do intend to find ways to have greater competitive density than we saw in our first major events, seasonal, right? Once you have enough, not at this point, once you have enough heroes, right? Living Legend Showdown, these heroes are the ones you're allowed to play. Done. Okay? That's the easiest way for them to make every single hero have an impact to the Living Legend format, right? Depending on what the season is, X heroes will be useful, and therefore you always have at the back of your mind that at any point, if this hero is allowed, this hero could be, the top deck of the Living Legend format, depending on what LSS pick in sense of, again, that seasonal idea. Stravo may be facing a mountain of restrictions in this announcement, but he, in many ways, he is in, well, you really want Prism to be the face, right? I think that was clear from the statue, and a huge impetus for many to participate, yes. So he's become the face, he's shoved his way in there, right? He stole the show, just as he was intended to do, but then he is also a big gripe for a lot of people, which is funny because, again, you contradict yourself up here, right? Which is weird. Rest assured that we believe Stravo will continue to be a fixture in the metagame despite these changes, hopefully fulfilling his role as a format flag bearer in a much healthier fashion. We will continue to closely monitor format health, use our tools of bans and restrictions liberally, and strive to make Living Legend a format we're excited to play for many years to come. Commoner, Amulet of Ice banned, Stubby Hammerers is banned. Yeah, Stubby Hammerers, right? Again, if you look through the first lot of sets, there are tons of cards that are huge amounts of power creep, right? That probably should never have been released, but we were just at that point in the game where they weren't sure what, the classical design of a card should be. While we don't get to check in on the Commoner often, the recent side events at World Championship, as well as conversations with the community caretakers of the format, has given us the opportunity to evaluate the current state of the Commoner metagame. We see a healthy format with solid representation for multiple classes, but it does feel like several notable power outliners which previously faced bans in other formats have been given a bit of a free pass. With an Amulet of Ice ban reducing Icelander's ability to invalidate an opponent's defense measures, and Stubby Hammerer's ban taking just a pinch of explosiveness away from Ninja, Runeblade, and any other hero looking to go exceptionally wide. We are optimistic that there are, or can be, more room for slower, more controlling strategies in the Commoner format. Again, unless it gets more notoriety, more incentive pumped into it, it's not going to do its job. And while it is useful to monitor it, right, it's clear that it's an afterthought compared to some of the other formats. The end of suspensions. While this updates, we can officially discontinue the use of the suspended category. Suspensions came during a formative time for our efforts at format management and seemed an important way to let players know our long-term intentions around targeted cards. Since those early days, we've worked hard to develop our communication channels and now feel prepared to deliver appropriate context around banned and restricted decisions in articles such as these. If it is our intention to ban or unban a card only until a certain hero reaches Living Legend as a contingent experiment or in any other scenario that falls outside the realm of a typical ban, we will disseminate that information in the announcement of the card's banning. I think suspensions were fine, right? You built it up to be a unique term for Flesh and Blood. If a card was suspended, it was suspended because of this hero, and once this hero leaves, it will be unsuspended, right? I think that was fantastic, and I think it was a lot more palatable, right? Rather than, well, here's the ban list. These cards are banned till this happens, but these cards are banned till future notice. I think it was just a more clear, concise way, right? And I don't quite get why they're not continuing its use. Having, easily identifiable keywords is, a hallmark of TCGs, right? And I think it's great to have it in articles, right? You see suspended, that card is banned until X thing happens. You see banned, that card is banned until, they deem it unban worthy, or just, think of it as being banned for the foreseeable future. Okay, now, weapons, right? This is where I want to zero on it, because we have Kasai now, both versions using Centauri Sabers. So not legal till new Kasai comes, then it's legal again. New Kasai goes, then it's not legal again unless they, print another hero for it, and yada yada. It's just, again, more levels of inconsistency versus that of Prism, right? And I didn't actually realize this happened. But so if you don't know, in the expansion slot, there is a far better Luminaris coming to actually make Prism a bit more viable. And yeah, apparently her signature weapons are both, right? So if she goes, both go. And I think that in itself is more confusing and interesting, right? So what is the new Luminaris? Angel's Glow. It is just a straight better iteration than Celestial Fury, right? They do basically the same thing, but Angel's Glow is significantly better because it's easier to get off and it's actually more impactful. So Celestial Fury, what launched with Dust Till Dawn, pay 2, right? Instant, target angel attack or attack action card with Herald in its name gets to go again. So very key emphasis on the or, right? Versus new Angel's Glow. If there is a yellow card in your pitch zone, so again, it's similar to pitching 2, except, right, you don't have to spend the resources on this. You can spend it on attacking, on doing something else. The first attack action card with Herald in its name, you play each turn, and, right, so not or, and your first angel attack each turn gets to go again, right? So this is pitch a yellow, don't pay for this card, but pay for your actual, activity during your turn, and then get go again twice, right? You can go Herald and Angel versus Celestial Fury, which is pitch the yellow, pay for this, and then one of those gets go again, right? So there is no point whatsoever to me to have Celestial Fury, right? I don't see it as a valid reason, right? Because it has that once per turn to be ever utilized in replace of Angel's Glow. And that's just weird to me, right? Because again, this is a direct form of power creep. They could have gone in a different direction slightly. This is most definitely needed, right? Because new Prism is just a huge step down because, again, they wanted to make sure it wasn't, a carbon copy or didn't even come close to old Prism. But the fact that, again, this is the new iteration is just a straight one-up to the old one is a bit awkward to me. Because, again, it just completely devalues the usefulness of this card. This card just doesn't need to exist anymore, right? With the new version. But I think more than anything, what it really makes me circle back to is, do you think, right, weapons should complement a deck, or weapons should be, the other half of a hero's ability, right? Because in the whole sense of signature weapons, right, it's more that sort of aspect where the weapon should be the other half, right? In most cases, you're meant to use this weapon. A fun alternative playstyle might come up and you use a different weapon, but being a signature weapon, it should be the other half of the hero's ability. Of course, we see that, not really hold true across the board. There are heroes where the weapon is mandatory, and then there are heroes where, the weapon is a choice. And at, its current iteration is probably your best applicable choice, just because the variety of weapons is not really there. Now, in terms of the Centauri Sabers, if we look at heavy hitters and new Kasai, right? So both still revolve around sword. So that's the big impact for Centauri Saber. But this doesn't really feed into, new Kasai's ability. So aside from Blood on Her Hands, which is its whole other bag of will it be playable, because, again, Copper Generation is no longer new Kasai's thing, we don't actually have this whole aspect of where you want to swing twice with a weapon, right? We still get the artwork that shows a Centauri Saber, or at least 2 weapons, so it does make sense from that perspective. But at the end of the day, you don't necessarily need to run a one-handed weapon in Kasai, right? Your main gimmick is you want a sword. Now, there aren't that many options for swords, so again, you're most likely just running Centauri Saber because, again, it's that well-rounded aspect of a card. And I really hope we get a ton of weapons in heavy hitters, again, to go down that other aspect rather than the weapons being the other half of the hero's ability, but being, this cool little toolkit that you can take. So in terms of Centauri Saber, I do think it is a little bit lazy just to keep this card. Again, they could have gone in a direction that suits new Kasai a little bit better. So for instance, Cell Sword, which is your main gimmick now, can only attack if you've attacked with a weapons turn, right? So you don't have to hit, you have to attack. And then Kasai's actual ability, you do have to hit to generate the gold token. So some sort of weapon that, maybe had a bigger cost, but had some sort of guaranteed hit effect, right? Could have been cool. Again, would have leaned more towards it being a signature weapon than the other half of Kasai's ability. But instead, we get the prolonged use of Centauric Saber, which I think does sort of bog down design, right? Because again, it's that whole argument now where whenever they feel like they're in a pinch, they can just pull an old weapon out from the Living Legend bin rather than try to come up with something new conceptually. And I do think that's sort of a lazy fallback to have from a design aspect, rather than coming up with a whole new design that still fits the hero, the ability, and the overall set. Now, in terms of weapons overall, they're definitely in a weird place, because again, you have the plethora of cards that are, again, actual signature weapons that feel like the other half of a hero, and then you have weapons that are just, niche effects that are the best suitable option for X hero, but not actually, vital to their playstyle. Now, Centauric Saber for old Kasai, I would say, is vital, mainly because, again, there is no other option. But for new Kasai, right, again, it's a give or take. Take this or a two-handed sword if you think you can land the two-handed sword a little bit better. Because again, until we see some form of copper generation or convert gold to copper, blood on our hands is kind of irrelevant, right? Which means that you're not in the whole one-handed weapon aspect. And I could see Kasai with one of the axes doing better, because it's an easier time to get that effect off. Now, you don't get the one less, right, from your main first ability, but I think you'd have an easier time getting to the second stage. I might be completely wrong again, I haven't played a lot of Warrior, but I do think overall, again, not my idea, I saw it somewhere on Reddit, so full credit. I should really write down the names, I'm sorry, but someone said we really just need a supplemental set that is a whole just toolkit of cards, right? A whole bunch of weapons, a whole bunch of actual usable mid-level armor, and then just a whole bunch of archetype, joining cards. And again, no real theme to it, no real, again, these are the heroes we're trying to push, just here's all these cards to support the ongoing plethora of different branches that is Flesh and Blood, and go nuts. Because again, weapon-wise, there are not as many options as I personally would like, especially in, say, the generic slot, especially when there are lots of cards that are specific. They want a sword, they want a one-hand, they want a two-hand, they want an axe, and it would just be cool to see these different options. And then in terms of equipment and armor, right, it's still in that really awful spot where we get anything that isn't, a legendary piece, and it is just far too weak, because it just is too slow, and it's not that great of value to run in Classic Constructed, versus all the high-end gear, which might be a little less powerful, but you get such great ongoing effects that you're always going to take it in place of just the standard, Fortikind that they print in every single set, that is just there to mostly just be flavorful, because nothing really has replaced or redesigned in a great way the initial, iteration of, what do we call this? Just the generic armor, right? So again, using Dust Till Dawn as a reference, had the frontline sets being not blade broke, right? Even just temper or just nothing at all, and you get the first 2 rounds, right? Your first 2 rounds to have, a huge amount of block, and then a moderate amount of block, and then nothing. I think would have been fine, would have been fantastic, would have been a decent alternative if you're going against a tempo heavy deck. But yeah, overall, again, it's a step towards the future of Flesh and Blood. Again, this year is going to be heavily impactful to see how the competitive scene shapes, and exactly what they're doing with Living Legend and the Living Legend format, as well as, how they intend to keep the game balanced and growing, right? And growing in a good way in terms of supporting the heroes and card design. Anyway, hope you enjoyed. See ya.